Hello, everyone out there in cyber land. We're just going to give people a few more minutes to sign on, and then we'll get started with this very important presentation. Hi, and welcome to the webinar, Is It Time for Me to Stop Treatment? I'm Andrea Herzberg, Share's Ovarian Helpline Manager and one of our ovarian support group facilitators.
And I'm Victoria Goldberg. I'm one of the volunteers for the Metastatic Breast Cancer Helpline and a facilitator of metastatic breast cancer support groups. And I'm also a senior producer of the podcast dedicated to metastatic breast cancer patients by breast cancer patients living with this disease. And it's called Our MBC Live.
Before the presentation begins, I'd like to tell you a little bit about SHARE. SHARE is a national nonprofit that supports, educates, and empowers anyone who has been diagnosed with women's cancers and provides outreach to the general public about signs and symptoms, because no one should have to face breast, ovarian, uterine, cervical, or metastatic breast cancer alone. For more information, please visit our website at sharecancersupport.org. All participants will be muted during the presentation. When Dr. Ferrell finishes presenting, we will begin the Q&A. You are welcome to submit questions during the presentation through the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. When asking questions, remember that Dr. Ferrell is unable to give specific medical advice, so please keep your questions general in nature. I also want to mention that closed captioning is available. You can enable this feature by clicking the live transcript button on the bottom of the screen and selecting the subtitle option. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the SHARE website soon.
Now, I'm really honored to introduce our speaker and a living legend, Dr. Betty Ferrell. Dr. Ferrell has been in nursing for 44 years and has focused her clinical expertise and research in pain management, quality of life, and palliative care. Dr. Ferrell is the Director of Nursing Research and Education and a professor at the City of Hope Medical Center in California. She is a fellow of the American Academy of Nursing, and she has over 480 publications in peer-reviewed journals and texts. She is principal investigator of the End-of-Life Nursing Education Consortium project. Dr. Ferrell was co-chairperson of the National Consensus Project for Quality Palliative Care. In 2013, Dr. Ferrell was named one of the 30 visionaries in the field by the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. In 2019, she was elected a member of the National Academy of Medicine. In 2021, Dr. Ferrell received the Oncology Nursing Society Lifetime Achievement Award, and she was inducted as a living legend by the American Academy of Nursing. I am so happy and excited to present Dr. Ferrell.
Thank you very much. I'm so pleased to be joining you today for what I know is both a very important topic, but also a very difficult topic to sometimes talk about. And so in preparing for today, I'm going to share some information with you, but then I also wanted to make sure that I saved plenty of time for questions and discussion, because this is a topic that really, I think, lends itself to hearing from you and also to be able to answer any questions or comments that you might have. So thank you for the really lovely introduction. I also want to just say what an honor it is to be with you, because the work that you're doing in trying to support other women facing cancers and to really be advocates and to support each other is just such valuable work. And so I'm really, really in awe of the great work that you're doing, and very, very happy to assist in any way. As you mentioned, I've actually this spring, about right now, marks my 45th year as an oncology nurse. And about a week ago, I celebrated my 33rd year here at City of Hope. So this has really been my life's work in the area of oncology. And much of my work has been about the idea of quality of life, because I learned 45 years ago, within my first few days of working in oncology, that yes, we hope for long lives. We hope for people to be successfully treated for cancer, but equally important is quality of life. And so I think today's topic is really about quality of life, and about when it comes to a point where you need to think about what is the right choice for you. And sometimes that right choice is to stop cancer treatments and to focus on the quality of life. So I'm going to just jump in, and I've prepared some slides, and I'll walk you through those. I hope what we'll be doing with these slides is really just to generate some thoughts for you. Perhaps you'll hear some things that you can really identify with and think, wow, I wondered if I was the only person thinking about that, or, this sounds like what I've been experiencing. So I'll share some things that hopefully will resonate with you. And then again, as I mentioned, we will have plenty of time for questions and conversation. So we start with this first slide and our topic of, is it time for me to stop treatment? And I sort of picked this picture, this visual, to say that really it is a crossroads, that it is not an easy choice, because as you look at this picture, we don't really know what's down either of these paths. And so when a woman is thinking about, is this the point in time, maybe you've had, another recurrence, perhaps the side effects of treatment have become so difficult and disruptive. For whatever reason, you may be at this crossroads where you are making a difficult decision. Do I continue on this path of more treatment, more treatment, more treatment, with the goal of trying to survive as long as possible? Or is it time to change directions, to change paths, and to stop treatment, and to hope that by stopping treatment, that your quality of life may be improved, and that the quality of whatever time is remaining may be improved by this decision to stop treatment? But as you can see in this picture, and as all you know very well, it's not an easy decision, right? It is not at all easy to make this choice. And in making this choice and starting down either of these paths, we don't really know, for the most part, what is likely to unfold. And so I want everyone to just be assured, to know that for every woman who's ever stopped at this point and faced this crossroad and thought about, what should I do, that I've never had anyone tell me that it's easy. I've always heard people say it's really, really hard. And it's hard for me and my whole family. That, the choice that you might make for yourself may be very different than other family members make. And so, again, we'll talk a lot in this session about not just you and your quality of life, but we'll also talk about your family and how you communicate with them and what's important to them. Next. So on the next slide, to kind of start this, as I mentioned, stopping treatment is a difficult decision that impacts you and very much your family. And, getting to this point of stopping treatment may happen because you've been hospitalized for some reason. Maybe you've had a bowel obstruction or pain that's increasing. And so while hospitalized, you find out information about the status of your disease that makes you wonder if it's time to stop treatment. Or perhaps you've just come into a clinic visit and the latest blood work or scans have shown worsening disease. And so in the outpatient clinic setting, you may be faced with beginning to need to think about decisions ahead. Or it could simply be that you're at home, that you haven't gone to the clinic, there hasn't been anything urgent, but perhaps you're just finally you've woke up and you've realized that, one more trip in for chemotherapy or starting another round of treatment is just not something that you want to pursue. So whether sort of the news has come to you that's brought you to this point of thinking about a decision, or whether you, just in evaluating your own life or your own quality of life, you have decided it's time for this conversation. And that brings you to this point. But it will be a really difficult time, because it will be a difficult time for you, thinking that perhaps you won't survive your illness. And it will be a really tough time for all of those around you, your clinicians, your family members, your friends. This will just be very difficult, which is also why we should be thinking about how much support you need. This will also be a time where the most information you have, the more sense of control you have over what's happening, and the more support you have, the more likely it is that you will get through this time together. And so just as when you were very first diagnosed with cancer, most of the people I've interacted with over all of these decades have said, the more information I could have, the more I could know, I would feel less out of control. And the more that I could communicate with people about what's happening with me, the better it was. And so the same thing applies now when it comes to thinking about stopping treatment. Next. So I've listed on the next slide some things that you might consider. And so some of you on this call today may say, I'm at this point. This is something I've really been thinking about. And I really anticipate making a decision in the next few weeks or months. Perhaps other of you are on the call today and you currently are doing very well. Maybe you're in remission. You don't have current signs of disease. Or perhaps you are living with metastatic disease and yet you're pretty stable. Things are going pretty well. And so for you, this isn't a decision that you'll need to make immediately. But again, the earlier that you can have this conversation with the people that are around you, and the more that you can think about this, so that whether this decision comes in the months or years ahead or not for a very long time, it's still something that the fact that you've thought about it will make it easier for you to face when you really do need to make some difficult decisions. So I've listed on this slide some of the things you might consider. So whether this is an issue for you this week, or whether it's something you're anticipating may be an issue in months or years ahead, what are some questions that you might want to ask yourself? So the first question that I listed on this slide is, what's most important to you? And I think that's probably the most important question. What is most important to you? I had a patient I had known and interacted with for many, many years, more than 20 years, who had ovarian cancer. And she had had surgery and chemotherapy and participated in clinical trials and had been through years and years of treatment. And she got to this point in time just last fall. And I had this conversation with her. What is most important to you? And the things that she said to me are things that I hear from everyone. What's important to me now is to have some time. She shared her husband, who she had been married to for 50 years, was not prepared. And she really wanted to feel like she had a few months to help get him prepared for her death. And that she was becoming very fearful, that she was getting very, very sick from treatment. And she was afraid that there was a risk she could die suddenly. And so therefore, what was important to her is knowing she wanted to sort of stop treatment, be as healthy as possible for as long as she could be, because one of her greatest priorities was preparing her husband. People often tell me what's important to them is quality time. They want to make that one more trip to visit grandchildren, or they want to, be there for an upcoming graduation or wedding, or they perhaps, so many of us now live in that generation where we're caring for elderly parents or grandparents. And so we need to make arrangements for who will take care of all the people we take care of once we are not able to do that. And so asking yourself this question and talking with others about your answers to this question, what is most important to you, should in fact, help guide the decisions that you'll make. Another way I often ask people this question, what's most important to you, is to say, what brings you joy, right? What are the days during your life when you feel joyful? Is it because it was a day where you felt good enough to go work in your garden? Is it a day where you felt good enough that you could say, yes, bring the grandkids over. I want to spend some time with them. So whatever is important, what brings you joy, those are the things that you will consider as to, will stopping treatment make those more possible? The next thing on the slide is, I think what all of you think about all the time, and is that balance, balancing quality of life and quantity of life. Here at the City of Hope, one of the things we're most known for is at the front of our hospital, there's a rose garden. And in the rose garden is a big gate, an iron gate. And on the gate, there is a saying, it's a quote from one of our first presidents from many, many, many years ago. But on the gate, it says, there is no profit in curing the body if in the process we destroy the soul. And I think those words are so true. And so many patients, tell me, I saw that gate, and that's exactly how I'm feeling. That, I know that the chemotherapy may have some benefit, or, now I've been told maybe I need another aggressive surgery. And I know these treatments may offer me a little bit, longer survival, but I've also been through enough treatment that I know the price that I pay, that I may get very sick, or in fact, the treatment could make my death come sooner. And so it is that balance of quality and quantity of life. And quality of life means something different to every single one of us. What quality of life may mean for one person may look incredibly different. For example, I've had many, many patients over the years that have some work that they would like to finish. Perhaps they're writing a paper or writing a book, or they want to create a journal and an album to pass on to their children and grandchildren to make sure the family history isn't lost. So sometimes people have some unfinished work or unfinished business that is really important for their quality of life. For other people, it may be travel. For someone else, it may be reconnecting with a friend or family member, or maybe even mending a relationship that wasn't so positive. And so whatever quality of life means to you. The next bullet says having a sense of control. And, I hear this so much more from women than I do men patients, to be really honest. For women who are diagnosed with any kind of cancer, I so often hear women say early in their illness, I'm a woman. I used to be in charge of things, right? I controlled my household. I took care of my kids. I made sure that everything, happened on schedule. I had a job. I was in charge. I was in control. And the moment I started cancer treatment, I realized, wow, I had lost control. I was no longer the person in control. And so what many women have shared is that, once they maybe got through that first treatment and they were trying to just regain their balance, they realized how important it was to try to have some sense of control. So, for example, joining a support group such as this is a way that people seek control. Having difficult conversations, with their doctors, or seeking information about their prognosis or status of their disease or treatments is a way to have control. The next bullet is probably the topic that I would say, if I had to guess, what's the one thing that most of you on the call today are struggling with? All of these things are important, but I would probably venture that so many of you are having this conversation because you're really worried about your family. You're worried about being a burden on your family. If you have more treatments, will that just make you sicker and make you be a bigger burden on your family? Perhaps you're having this conversation because you want to make sure that you are able to make decisions so that your family doesn't have to make decisions for you. But worry about and concern about burden on family is such a huge, huge part of being at this place in time of needing to make decisions. The next thing really goes along with that, and that is what I've called your wishes versus your family wishes. I would say that, again, from decades of interacting with patients and families, most often when a patient first raises the issue of maybe it's time to stop treatment, the most common response from family members is, what? Absolutely not. No, mom, you've got to keep up the chemotherapy. You know what this means. Or a spouse who's well-intended, or partner, who says, oh, I know this is really hard for you, but, keep going. You can do it. We can do it. I'm here to support you. So kind of, we would call the cheerleader family member that just wants to keep cheering for you and wants to keep being there to support you. But for the family, keep going is sort of the mantra. And yet that's really the difficult time when your wishes versus your family's wishes may not be the same. And the last thing I added to this slide is really your needs and your relationship with your physician or clinicians. I talk to a lot of patients, and again, particularly women patients, who will say, my doctor mentioned there's no more treatment for me at all. I've exhausted all my options, but there is one new clinical trial they think will be starting. And my doctor shared, it probably won't benefit me, and it may have some very serious side effects. But I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna enroll in the trial because I don't want to disappoint my doctor. Or women may say, my doctor's been with me since the first day I found the first lump in my breast. My doctor was there during surgery, during radiation, during chemotherapy. My doctor was there after I had been disease-free for years, but then I had a recurrence. My doctor was there to start treatment again, and I don't want to disappoint my doctor. So it's a common thing for patients to make decisions about their own body and their own care because they don't want to disappoint, or they want to do what they think their doctor or other clinicians will expect. And that's a really important thing to think about. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but I just want to really assure you that, again, this should be a time to really pause and remember this is your body, it's your life, and that we all need to support you in making the decisions, the choices that are in your best interest. And I can promise you that your doctor wants what is best for you. Your doctor wants you to make the decision that is best for you. We all, your whole healthcare team, your nurses and social workers, chaplains, physical therapists, we all understand that at this crossroads, you need to make the decision that's best for you. Next. So the next picture that you see on this screen is a quality of life model. And as I mentioned, I came here to City of Hope 33 years ago. And when I first came to City of Hope, one of the things that drew me here was because I knew that at the City of Hope, there was a lot of focus on quality of life. And in fact, the way I came to know about City of Hope was because of some researchers that I had met before I came to California. And they were researchers from City of Hope doing work in the area of quality of life, helping to define what is quality of life for someone with cancer and what are the dimensions of quality of life. And so when I first came 33 years ago, this was one of my first projects, was to try to define what does quality of life mean for someone with cancer and what are the dimensions of quality of life. And so what you see in this box, this is a picture of quality of life. And there are 4 dimensions that we use. The first is physical well-being, that your quality of life is very impacted by things happening to you physically. So things like your ability to function. Is continued treatment making you less able to be active or to get out and enjoy activities? What about things like strength, fatigue, sleep, just your overall physical health? Symptoms such as nausea or appetite disturbance, constipation, pain, that physical well-being very much is a part of your quality of life. And so again, within this context today, thinking about stopping treatment, there is that point where you think about, are the physical effects of my treatment really impacting my quality of life? The next box is psychological well-being. And this is the part of the quality of life model where we really move beyond the physical and say, having cancer is a whole person experience. It's more than a physical experience. Having cancer means things like a loss of control, anxiety, depression. When you find that less and less you're able to participate in enjoyable or leisure activities. Physical symptoms that you have cause tremendous distress, such as having pain isn't just a physical problem, it's very frightening, it's distressing. Happiness and fears, and perhaps even cognition. Many people say that the chemotherapy is making them feel confused or groggy, and so their thinking is really impacted. On the bottom side of the screen is social well-being, and that is every woman with cancer is someone who's connected to other people and other relationships. And so what is this illness and treatment doing in terms of your family, roles and relationships? And again, I think women struggle so much with women who have been used to taking care of everyone else in the family, and now you're finding less ability to take care of others and even struggling with taking care of yourself. Cancer and cancer treatment certainly affect affection, the ability to be intimate, and sexual function. And again, that can be a big factor as women make decisions about treatment. Physical appearance, ability to do work or stay employed, isolation, and of course, the financial burden. So these are all part of social well-being. And the last box is spiritual well-being. And regardless if you are someone who has a religious affiliation or you're someone who does not consider themselves religious at all, but perhaps you think of yourself as a spiritual being, or for all people, just being a living person, there are elements of spiritual well-being. And so what does this illness mean to you? What does it feel like to live with such uncertainty? How do you maintain hope? And yet at the same time be realistic. Religion, many people tell me, oh, I used to be religious, or I went to church as a child, but then as an adult, I really haven't been part of a religious community. But now I'm thinking I'd like to go back to church or re-engage with my rabbi or priest. Transcendence, that, this is a different point in life. And also, many people say that positive changes happen, that as they faced cancer, as their illness has progressed, it's caused them to slow down and to really be thoughtful about what's really most important. And so cancer is not only a physical disease, a tumor, but it becomes a physical, a psychological, a social, and even a spiritual experience. Next. So above all, I think we would say seek support. Don't face this point in your illness alone. Definitely, we could spend a lot of time today talking about advanced directives, but I think the key issues are that for anyone, any adult, healthy or ill, we should have advanced directives. We should have our wishes expressed in writing. And certainly for anyone who's had cancer, you should have an advanced directive where you put in writing, who would you like to be involved in making decisions? What are your goals? What is most important to you? what kind of care do you want to have and what kind of care would you not want to have? Access palliative care early. I think that's a huge message. Obviously, that's been a part of my work for many years, but palliative care is now a specialty that exists to provide this kind of support. Palliative care is usually delivered in cancer settings by interdisciplinary teams, so doctors, nurses, chaplains, social workers, others, whose goal is to help address your quality of life. And of course, this is also a time to just surround yourself with support. That, think about who are those friends that have been sort of standing by or who've always said, I'll be here if you need me. So surrounding yourself with as much support as is at all possible. If you have specific comments or questions about advanced directives, we can talk about those in our discussion time. Next. I did want to say a few things about the specifics of talking with your physician and talking with your family. In terms of talking with your physician, I do think it's really important to recognize your relationship history with your clinicians. In addition to physicians, I've also heard many patients say to me, I've been coming to my cancer hospital for 10 years, and there's this wonderful nurse, Sally, and Sally gave all my chemotherapy, and now I see Sally every time I come in the clinic. So it may be a relationship with your doctor or your clinic nurse or whoever it might be, but you do have a relationship with the people who have been caring for you. And so I know it does feel as if maybe you're abandoning them, or that you feel like you're letting them down if you decide to stop treatment. You may need to be the one to initiate the conversation. And I do a lot of work with our medical oncologist here in my hospital. I have a large project now where we're trying to really help patients who have finished clinical trials and who now really there is no other treatment option at all remaining. And so they are transitioning to this time beyond treatment. And what we find is that so many physicians, if the patient doesn't initiate the conversation, then the physician just continues on the path, come back in 3 more months, get more lab work, repeat more scans. And only when the patient speaks up and says, Dr. Smith, I'd really like to talk about where we're going. I'd really like to talk about, what's important to me at this point in time. And maybe I really don't want to, spend my time coming in and getting lab work and scans. Maybe this is a time I'd really like to be at home as much as possible. You probably will need, as you talk to your clinicians, you will probably need to specifically ask them very direct questions. So, often when you ask your doctor, what do you think? How long do I have? The most common response from physicians is, they don't want to speculate. And sometimes it's very hard for us to know. We don't really know exactly how much time you will live. And so physicians tend to say, well, we don't really know. So they're very vague. And yet being vague doesn't help you. And so the way I coach patients is to say, you need to say to your doctor, Dr. Smith, you've always been honest with me. We've always had a good relationship. And right now it's really important for me to talk to you. I know that you can't predict exactly how long I'll live, but I would really appreciate it if you could tell me in your best estimate how long you think I will live. So it's like by letting the doctor know that you're giving, you're not expecting that he's going to be exact, and that it's difficult for him too. And yet, you do need to know kind of the best estimate of what he thinks the future will look like. So ask specific questions and expect to get answers. Certainly involving a family member. I'm sure that, all of you can remember the very first time you were diagnosed with cancer and how incredibly overwhelming it was. That it was a different world to enter. And so there was so much about medications and treatments and scans and tests and what doctors you were seeing. And it was so overwhelming. And so to have someone with you to take notes and to, write down information and to bring your questions that you would probably forget. So the same is true now, having a family member really involved in these visits and supporting you. It's again, in the same way that you made a list of questions when you were first diagnosed, you need to make a list of questions. What questions do you have now? Next. And then probably even much harder than talking with your clinicians is this challenge of talking with your family. So I've shared here on the screen things that patients have told me and things that I've witnessed for many, many years in many, many hundreds, if not thousands of patients have said. One of the first things is, as you think about the possibility that you may not survive, as you think about stopping treatment, one of the things you may want to do is to really pause and think about who are the key family members that you want to first discuss your goals with. Many women have said, well, you know, my partner or my spouse kind of just kept things going at home, but it was really my daughter who went with me to the visit, and my daughter was sort of that person. But I think at this point in time, I would really like to talk to my partner or spouse first, because I think I'm going to really, you know, want that conversation to happen. I want my spouse to really hear about my decision first. And I'm really going to need him or her to help me talk to the kids, talk to my daughter. So think about who are the key family members that you first want to talk about your goals. Next is be prepared. I would say it is a rare thing for a patient to make a decision to stop treatment and for the family to say, we understand completely, we're with you, we also have been thinking about this and it's a good idea. It just doesn't happen very often. For the most part, when you say, I'm thinking about stopping treatment, what you will hear is, oh no, we can help you. We can do this. Not now. Let's don't even talk about this. You know, all of those expressions, which are really just ways for family to say, we love you very much and we can't bear to have this conversation. And so be prepared. Be prepared for their grief, for their confusion, for their avoidance, and for their denial. Because in sharing with your family that it's time to stop treatment, you will, in fact, find yourself really needing to take care of them for the most part, because they will have so many emotions. And then, of course, you'll want to determine who and how information will be shared with other people. Again, similar to when you were first diagnosed. You know, who should I tell? Who tells? Who needs to know now? These are important things to think about. But it's just very, very difficult. Next. Also, I wanted just specifically to kind of add in talking with children, whether it is your own children or perhaps your grandchildren or nieces or nephews or children in your neighborhood. Talking with children, of course, can be very difficult when it comes to explaining being at this point or making a decision to stop treatment. I think the things that we always want to do is encourage children to ask questions, what's on their mind. And so children will say, you know, is it because of me? Is it, is this my fault? Or why are you doing this? So with children, instead of just giving information, we want to always make sure we have time to listen to them and their questions. We want to encourage children to share their emotions. I know this makes you sad. You know, let's talk about your sadness. So I know this may make you worried about what will lie ahead, what questions are in your mind. So sharing of emotions. This should be a time to identify what support systems exist in the school, in the community, you know, how will children be supported? And then seeking support from the clinical setting. For example, are there social workers or psychologists or child life specialists that might be available to help with children? Next. And then finally, just that this will not be a one-time conversation, obviously, that once you've shared information with your family, Just know that you've just now opened a new door that they probably weren't prepared for. And so this will be an ongoing series of conversations as they work through their feelings and their grief. And so this phase beyond treatment is also a journey, much like the journey that you have been on while seeking treatment. And also just know that your needs and the needs of others may change over time. Perhaps initially your daughter or spouse may have been supportive and said, whatever you want, but then it might be 2 or 3 weeks from now when they come back to you and say, well, I've been thinking about it and I don't think this is a good choice. So just know that emotions change and things change, and it will be a journey as you've been on before. And that's okay. That, we want to support all of those ups and downs and all of those times along the way. I've ended here with including some useful resources and websites. There is a lot of good information out there. These are some materials that you should be able to easily find online. I accessed all of these online, but they're also probably available through your cancer settings. So, for example, NCI has a booklet planning the transition to end-of-life care in advanced cancer, if cancer treatments stop working, when to stop cancer treatment, knowing when it's time to stop treatment. So there's lots and lots of resources out there to help. So I think that's the last slide, and we will stop now, and I'll turn things back over to Andrea and Victoria. And I know there are some questions that we got in advance that I'll try to address, and then open to all of your questions.
Oh, yes, there are questions, but woo! First of all, out of gratitude to Dr. Ferrell, I'm compelled to say that you have met our challenge of providing a framework for thinking about the most personal of existential questions. And I'm sure that, I hope you can feel the gratitude wafting around you. And we have a lot of questions, and we're going to start the Q&A. You can still submit questions at the bottom of your screen. We're going to try to get through all the submitted questions, but we may not be able to do so due to time constraints. And I've tried to group together similar questions so that Victoria and I can ask them, and they're thematically will be answerable by Dr. Ferrell. Okay, Victoria, turning it over to you.
Yes, so I also want to say, Dr. Ferrell, thank you so much. It was such an incredibly informative presentation. And in fact, you've answered or touched upon many questions that we have from our listeners. But I'm going to start with the question that we had before the interview. And you have touched upon it, but I'm still going to ask it. And I don't understand. I'm sorry for a second. Yes, and there is a question, and we as Andrew said, we will be combining some questions that were submitted in advance and live. So you did talk about it, but how do you navigate stopping treatment when your family does not want you to stop? Mm-hmm. And sure. A second part to it is, what supportive services, and you did talk about, and you gave us the links to supportive services, but specifically for talking to your children and more broadly to the loved ones about stopping treatment?
Sure. So I'll kind of just throw out a few things. One is in healthcare and in teaching communication to physicians and clinicians, we often use a phrase called fire a warning shot. And what that means is that it's probably not a good idea that sitting there in the middle of dinner, you sort of throw out, oh, by the way, I'm thinking of stopping treatment, because you're going to catch everybody off guard and they're going to immediately say, Mom, are you crazy? Or, what are you thinking? And instead, this conversation is going to go much better if instead, you're able to say to your daughter, your whoever, your sister, I'm wondering if you could come over Wednesday. I'd really like us to sit and talk about some things, right? So give people a warning shot, prepare them for the notion that you want to talk about something important. I think that also helps to make sure that, you know, that you have the time and space, because, you know, if you've said to your daughter, I've decided to stop treatment, and then about then the kids come screaming through the living room and the phone's ringing and somebody's at the door, again, this is not going to go well. So I would say plan for the conversation, give people a warning shot, and then I would say fully expect that the people you're talking to are not going to be ready for this. They're just not. And so, for example, you know, another thing might be to say, you know, I'd like to talk to you tomorrow night. Can you come over? There's some important things. And then when they come over, you know, just first of all, just share, be honest in saying, I'm thinking very seriously about stopping treatment. I think it's good to tell people why, you know, that, you know, as you all know, my last treatment just about did me in. I got so sick, right? Or I have had a conversation with my doctor, but sort of say why. And then I think it's good to also be honest about your emotions, you know, to say, this is really hard for me because I love you all. And it's the last thing that I want to do to leave you. You know, we've all fought this together. So speak from your heart, you know, share honestly with the people that you love, and be fully prepared that this will be a process. And so, you know, when your family says, no, we're not even going to talk about this, or, you know, or is there something we've done, or mom, you're just having a bad week, right? Then, you know, just know that they are going to only be able to take in so much, and to say, I'd like us to talk again on Sunday, right? Or I wanted to talk to you first, but on Sunday, I'd like to also have John, you know, come over and join us so that we can continue talking. So kind of know that this will be an ongoing conversation, that you are probably much further in this thinking than your family is. And I think just, you know, to be able to speak honestly, you know, to be able to say, I know that for so long we've all fought so hard just to keep me going. And, you know, when I was first diagnosed 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago, we've all been on this path of trying hard to just keep living, and things have changed. You know, I just am not ready to go through another surgery or one more bowel obstruction, you know, one more. So I think, you know, another thing is I would say it helps if there is one person, you know, maybe it's not your family, maybe you have a friend who you're just really close with, or somebody here, a part of this support network. Sometimes I tell people practice, right? Practice. So, like, you know, I have a best friend. My best friend and I've been best friends for 35 years. We've been through a lot together. And if I were needing to have this conversation with my daughter, I would probably call my best friend and practice the conversation with her before I had the conversation with my daughter, because it would just help me. I say this all the time to patients. I always say, I'm glad to practice with you. If you want to come and if you want to talk to me first, and I'll be your daughter, and I will, you know, if you need to practice, then honestly, that can help sometime. But it will be hard, and it will take repeated conversations, but you just need to keep repeating what is important to you, why you're at this place in time, and that, you know, that you're going to get through this together in the same way that you've gotten through everything else together. This is a different journey, but you will do this together.
Thank you so
Carol,
much.
one participant is asking a very specific question. You did address what to do with, you know, how to approach young children, but she asks, you know, and she's really talking about not prepared to stop treatment, but like prepare a young child for her death, and she's asking about a child who has autism.
Yes, sure. So with all children, when we say children, I mean, that's from, infants to young adults. And then developmentally, mentioning a child with autism, that obviously there's an extreme, diversity between, children who may have some learning disability or different emotional needs or cognitive function. And so it always has to be, not every 9-year-old is the same, right? And so whatever we communicate with children has to be based on age, but also on developmental status. I would definitely, if you're needing to communicate with children, I would pause to try to see, are there resources? So for example, at our hospital, we have child life specialists, and they are often used, they're used a lot at the initial diagnosis to explain to a child, why mommy is going to be having her breasts removed, or, why mommy is going to have this surgery and come home with a very big scar on her tummy, and what chemotherapy is going to look like for mommy. But the child life specialist can often be very good at also talking about, the child's awareness of how sick mommy is, and that mommy may die from this illness. And so social workers, chaplains, child life specialists, nurses are often skilled at helping with those conversations with children. Again, it is discussing death particularly has tremendous variation depending on the child. Often very young children who, they have a very different concept. Oh, mommy's gonna, go up a ladder and live in a castle in the sky with God, and it's called heaven. And that, that is very different from, a 10-year-old who has a different understanding, or the point when children are at the place of recognizing that death is permanent, that mommy's not coming back down the ladder, so any conversation with a child has to be really attentive to that, not just any child that age, but that child, and will need a lot of support. And again, probably good for you to first meet, with the child life specialist or social worker or nurse, or a hospice. A lot of hospice programs have, social workers or grief counselors, people that are very skilled. So for you to first seek that, how should I tell my child, right? And how can I best support my child as they have questions or sadness? But definitely many of those resources are available.
Dr. Ferrell, this is something that I've been struggling with, especially in my support groups. Very often, and we have a question, actually a live question from the audience about this. Very often I hear from people in my support groups, and probably Andre does too, oh, chemotherapy is it's too hard. I can't take it anymore. I want to stop treatment. And we always get this feeling that people don't really quite understand that when you stop treatment, pain doesn't go away, that actually suffering remains. So an audience participant has asked the question, so whose responsibility is it really to explain to a patient exactly what will happen when they decide to stop treatment, the suffering that may come with that, the pain, how it's going to be handled?
Right. So I can just give you an example. I'm thinking of a woman I referred to earlier who I'd known for 20 years and who had ovarian cancer, and she actually died just a few weeks ago, but she had been through very aggressive. She actually had breast cancer even before that, like 25 plus years ago, probably 30 years ago. And then later developed ovarian cancer. And she had been through it all. She had had surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, more chemotherapy, clinical trials, more surgery, and now a second cancer. So, and so now she was aggressively trying to fight the cancer and going through some really, really tough chemotherapy. And because of the widespread disease throughout her abdomen, a lot of physical symptoms, a lot of severe constipation and pain, and just a horrible appetite, nausea, lots of problems. So in talking with her about where she just got to the point of saying, life is not, this is not life. This is not quality of life. I really want to stop treatment. So what we could do with her, what we were able to do then was to talk about which symptoms would persist and which symptoms might actually get better. So in her case, her greatest distress was that the chemotherapy was causing just such profound fatigue that she found that she was sleeping, all the time, that she could not enjoy. She had moved in with her daughter, had 2 young grandchildren in the home, but then couldn't even interact with them because she was so exhausted. So the goal was, and the hope was, that by stopping the chemotherapy, that actually her fatigue would probably improve, right? That was the direct result of the chemotherapy. So the fatigue we could tell her, again, it's our best estimate. We don't know exactly, but our best estimate is that the nausea would get much better and the fatigue would get much better. Her pain was probably not going to change because it was really the result of the tumor that was there and not going away. But there were better ways that we could control her pain. We could be more aggressive with her pain management. And then our hope was that by stopping the chemotherapy, that she would actually, get a little stronger, be a little more awake. And so she lived about 6 more months after stopping that treatment. And like many people, did have a period of time that was much better because she wasn't on treatment, and then she died of her disease. So I would say, ask those questions specifically. For the most part, as you all know, it shouldn't be this way. I've devoted my whole career to this. But even today, even with the best of clinicians, doctors, nurses, other people, they don't want to talk about dying, but you need to know about dying. And so you have to ask the specific questions. You have to say, if I stop treatment, what is your best estimate about what that might be like? Are there some of my symptoms that might get better? Are there some of my symptoms that might get worse? How long do you think it will be before my cancer really starts growing even more and I might get sicker? How long do you think I will live? So you ask specific questions, I would say.
Thank you. This was such a good answer. Thank you. It actually made me.
Thank you, Dr. Farrell. And we would love to keep you with us for hours and hours because the questions have poured in and a lot of them are quite individual. So I'm gonna, since the webinar really has to end shortly, I'm gonna skip down to a question that came in live, which is a little different. And it addresses the participants that live in what they're calling a death with dignity state. So I would imagine that's medical aid in dying. And, there's probably, I think there's I don't know, to my mind, there's 8 states that have it and many more. There's a lot of movements afoot. And this person is asking any insights on how to best navigate that decision with family and loved ones, or try to handle it in a way that others are more at peace with that decision.
Sure. So, I would say, first of all, I would encourage everyone to think about hospice care and palliative care, because in all 50 states, hospice is very available. And many, many people find that, when people tell me they're interested in assistance in dying, or, sort of arranging, the time of their own death, that what they're really saying is, I'm afraid, I'm afraid of symptoms being out of control. I'm afraid of being a terrible burden on my family. So I would really encourage everyone to first, have a conversation with hospice and fully understand the care that hospice will provide for you. There are now, I think, 10 states that for which, medical aid in dying, including my state of California, medical aid in dying is a possibility. And, there are widely, the beliefs about medical aid in dying, of course, are incredibly different, right? Some people are extremely opposed. Some people are very much in favor. And then there's everybody in between. And, it's not my job to judge anyone or to impose my personal beliefs on you as a patient. It's your life, it's your body, it's your death, right? So what I would say is that there are organizations, again, state by state, there are organizations that are available to talk with you about the option of medical aid in dying and what that looks like and how that's done, et cetera. And that will be a very personal choice, and also a personal choice with you and with your family. And I think, so I would just say that for everyone, I would start with the hospital. It's sort of like, I always say to people, we start in the shallow water, right? Instead of diving in the deep end. So I think I would start in the shallow water. I would, like, you've made a decision to stop treatment. Okay, that's you're venturing into the water, right? Now I would go a little deeper into the water and say, now, to your daughter, family, friends, now I'd like us to meet with hospice, because I would really like us all to talk about the fact that I'm not going to survive, and that I want us to all have a conversation about the end of my life, right? And about dying, and about what that will be like, and about what kind of care I need in the last weeks or months of my life, right? So now we're going a little deeper in the water. And then I think after meeting with hospice and understanding and having, getting people to talk about end of life care, then at that point in time, if it's your decision to pursue assisted death, then you're ready to go to that step, right? And so hospice can if you're in a state where medical aid in dying is legal, then hospice or any healthcare setting can then connect you to, the counselor, the contact, whoever can come and explain to you. And there are some variations by state, but they can explain to you then how medical aid in dying happens, right? So, but, I think the notion of, making the decision about ending your life is probably even going to be a harder conversation with your family. And so again, I just encourage you to start in the shallow water, move with your family. You have the first conversation, move toward hospice. And then if that is your desire to seek aid in dying, then there are many supports and people available to have those conversations with you.
Dr. Ferrell, thank you so much. And as Andrea just said, I wish we had more time to keep you here for a few more hours. So we've just really scratched the surface, and I hope that you will come back and we can continue this really important conversation. So thank you again. And thank you to everyone who participated in this webinar and submitted questions. But please take a moment to fill out the survey at the end of the webinar, which is now, and the survey will show up in the browser when the webinar ends. And the link will also be in the follow-up email. All surveys are anonymous, so please fill out the survey. It's really important to us. So this is the end of the webinar, and thank you so very much for being here. And Dr. Ferrell, again, I hope you can come back and talk to us again.
Absolutely. I'm very glad to join you again, and I'm glad to be available for questions or conversations or anything that I can do to be of support anytime.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.